Northern Ireland is set for crisis talks after a sixth night of rioting in Belfast saw Catholics and Protestants pelt each other with petrol bombs over a peace wall. Secretary of State Brandon Lewis is flying in to speak to First Minister Arlene Foster, Deputy First Minister Michelle O'Neill, Ulster Unionist leader Steve Aiken and Alliance party leader Naomi Long following the chaos last night that left 8 police officers injured. Loyalist youths hurled Molotov cocktails over the interface into nationalist areas which returned fire and lit blazes in the streets as police struggled to maintain order. Unionist thugs also hijacked and firebombed a bus and sent it blazing down the Shankill Road, while hundreds of others marched along the street in scenes reminiscent of the Troubles. Meanwhile, masked rioters hurled petrol bombs at police at the junction of Lanark Way and attacked a press photographer, smashing his camera and shouting derogatory sectarian terms at him. The PSNI said on Thursday morning 55 of its officers had been injured across several nights of disorder in the country. Boris Johnson and Ms Foster were quick to condemn the actions, with the PM calling for dialogue, while the DUP leader said there is no justification for violence. The Northern Ireland executive called an urgent meeting of politicians on Thursday morning to be briefed on the mayhem, and later released a joint statement deploring the destruction. The violence over the past week erupted after prosecutors said no action would be taken against 24 Sinn Féin politicians, including Deputy First Minister Michelle O'Neill, for a huge Republican funeral during the pandemic. They went to the service to Bobby Story, an IRA terrorist from Belfast who died after a failed lung transplant on June the 30th, along with about 1,500 people despite COVID rules. Loyalists are also angry at post-Brexit trading arrangements that have created economic barriers between the region and the rest of the UK. They see the Northern Ireland Protocol as undermining their place in the Union. Northern Ireland's so-called peace walls, 33 kilometres of concrete that separate nationalist and unionists after history of bloodshed. Despite being a small city of just 280,000 people, Belfast is marked out by more than 100 peace walls. The towering structures separate Catholic and Protestant communities in the city that has a history of horrific sectarian violence. During the Troubles, these interfaces were often the sites of conflict. The Falls Road and the Shankill Road in the west of the city is split by one of the most famous walls, which runs for 800 metres and has a number of huge gates swinging shut across the roads come nightfall. In nationalist areas, the flag of Ireland is often draped from the walls or painted on them, as well as the flag of Palestine, to show support for what they see as their fellow repressed people. In Unionist areas you can barely move for Union flags and Loyalist murals adorning the streets, walls and houses. The peace walls have become a popular tourist hotspot since the Good Friday Agreement brought relative peace to the country over 2 decades ago, but the history behind the walls are somewhat more gruesome. The first one was erected in 1969 following sectarian riots in Belfast. They were supposed to be temporary to keep the warring Republicans and Loyalists apart. But instead of being taken down, the walls were extended during the Troubles and remain there much the same to this day. Most were put up at the start of the bloody conflict, but about a third have been put up since the IRA ceasefire in 1994. Despite most people going to Northern Ireland ending up in Belfast, and so the peace walls becoming synonymous with the city, there are walls in other areas across the country. They also feature in Londonderry, Portadown, and Lurgan. If all the walls in Northern Ireland were put next to each other, it is estimated they would run for 21 miles. The longest wall is 5 miles by itself. After the Belfast Agreement in 1998, the violence dipped and gates were installed in the peace walls. It meant for the first time in many years near neighbours could meet people from the other side with ease. But there is still the presence of tension in the city, with PSNI officers manning some gates and closing them at night time. For all the controversy surrounding the structures, the walls have proved an unexpected attracting in the city tourism. Black cab tours escort foreigners around the walls and give them context on what happened, where and why which wall was famous, often citing their own experiences. They also feature some of the most popular murals in Belfast, which also attracts tourists. One of the walls on the Crumlin Road was pulled down in February 2016 and was the first to come down. But most still stand across the country. Stormont, the seat of the Northern Ireland Assembly, voted in favour of bringing down all the walls by 2023, but recent violence between Catholic and Protestant community will likely unnerve some ahead of the move. The gates of the Peace Wall on Lanark Way, which separates the mainly Loyalist Shankill Road from the mostly nationalist Springfield Road, were forced open late last night, leading to clashes between young members of the two communities. Shocking video footage showed petrol bombs being thrown over from both sides of the wall in a dramatic ramping up of sectarian violence. The bus was hijacked by Loyalist thugs on the Shankill Road at an intersection between nationalist and Unionist communities. Masked youths took the handbrake off and let it roll down the hill before the gang lobbed burning bottles and through the front door, and it quickly ignited. The PSNI's armoured Land Rover Tangis raced past the vehicle and pulled in front of it to force it to stop. As they performed the difficult manoeuvre, the crowd hurled stones and further firebombs at them before fleeing. A crowd of around 500 people, most of them adults, also gathered on the corner of the junction at Lanark Way as events unfolded. Further down the road a bonfire was lit, where a crowd of approximately 100 people, mostly young, were assembled. Video from later in the evening showed the bus smouldering, having burnt through. A spontaneous act of solidarity took place at Belfast City Hall for the driver of the bus today. Irish Congress of Trade Unions, IT2, Assistant General Secretary Owen Riade said it was a demonstration on behalf of the entire trade union movement to support the driver, who has been left shaken by the incident. He said, "There is an act of generosity towards their fellow bus driver who was shockingly attacked last evening, and towards the brave police officers and journalists who were also assaulted while doing their job and serving the community." Workers across Northern Ireland will not accept being the subject of attacks when going about their duties. The Translink workers are standing up and proclaiming this loudly. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. All public representatives from across the community and every person of goodwill and influence in interface areas have to make clear that all such protests end before we have another night of violence. Young people are being treated as cannon fodder. Someone is going to get killed. The best public service any decent person of influence can do right now is to prevent the spiral deepening. Politicians need to come together, work together and make politics work in the interest of the entire community. Earlier, Belfast Telegraph photographer Kevin Scott said he was assaulted by two of the rioters. The newspaper's visuals editor tweeted, "So much for peaceful. I have just been jumped from behind by two males, masked on Cooper Way." "One pulled me to the ground and smashed cameras. As I fought this one off I was told to F***K off back to your own area you Fenian C***T by the other." Police informed. He added, "What happened to me tonight was disgusting, but not on the same level as this," referring to the bus driver. Mr Johnson tweeted, "I am deeply concerned by the scenes of violence in Northern Ireland, especially attacks on PSNI who are protecting the public and businesses, attacks on a bus driver and the assault of a journalist." The way to resolve differences is through dialogue, not violence or criminality. First Minister Ms Foster condemned the attacks on Twitter, saying, "There is no justification for violence." "It is wrong and should stop." She later added, "This is not protest. This is vandalism and attempted murder." "These actions do not represent unionism or loyalism. They are an embarrassment to Northern Ireland and only serve to take the focus off the real lawbreakers in Sinn Féin." "My thoughts are with the bus driver," Deputy First Minister and Sinn Féin Vice President Ms O'Neill said. Disgraceful scenes of criminality tonight, including a potentially lethal attack on bus driver and assault on journalist. Unequivocal condemnation needed and protests should be called off immediately. Police need support, not politicking. Irish Premier Michelle Martin added, "I utterly condemn the violent attacks on police, a journalist, and bus driver over recent days in the north. Now is the time for the two governments and leaders on all sides to work together to defuse tensions and restore calm." Former Northern Ireland Secretary Theresa Villiers told Mail Online today, "Unfortunately, periodic rioting has been a feature of life in Northern Ireland for decades. It is always completely unacceptable, whatever the grievances which might underlie it. The culprits here are the people throwing the petrol bombs, and the Loyalist paramilitary crime gangs orchestrating this. There are important issues to tackle in relation to the operation of the protocol, and also regarding decisions made about policing the Bobby Story funeral, but violent law-breaking is entirely counterproductive for anyone who really wants to resolve these issues." Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer said the PM must step up and convene all-party talks to tackle violence in Northern Ireland. The Labour leader, a former human rights advisor to the Northern Ireland Policing Board, said there is no justification for several nights of disorder that have seen dozens of police officers injured. But he acknowledged there are concerns over the arrangements for the nation after the UK left the European Union, and he told Mr Johnson to find pragmatic political solutions over the rioting. Sir Keir said, "This is about leadership and the Prime Minister can't be absent. He needs to convene talks urgently to find pragmatic political solutions to reduce this violence." Asked during a campaign visit to Bristol if he thinks the violence is a consequence of Brexit, the Labour leader said, "There are concerns in Northern Ireland about Brexit. There are concerns about the promises that the Prime Minister made which haven't been kept." They don't justify the violence. Let's be very, very clear about that. What the Prime Minister needs to do now is step up, show leadership. You convene all-party talks and talk to the Government of Ireland, of course, as well, and resolve this with pragmatic political solutions. Northern Ireland leaders met for a briefing at 10 a.m. before the Stormont Assembly was recalled to discuss the recent scenes of violence. Ministers met earlier and were updated on the situation by PSNI Chief Constable Simon Byrne. In a joint statement, the executive said, "We are gravely concerned by the scenes we have all witnessed on our streets over the last week, including those at the Lanark Way interface last night. Attacks on police officers, public services and communities are deplorable, and they must stop." Destruction, violence and the threat of violence are completely unacceptable and unjustifiable, no matter what concerns may exist in communities those who would seek to use and abuse our children and young people to carry out these attacks have no place in our society. While our political positions are very different on many issues, we are all united in our support for law and order, and we collectively state our support for policing and for the police officers who have been putting themselves in harm's way to protect others. We and our departments will continue to work together to maximize the support we can give to communities and the PSNI to prevent further violence and unrest. A small group of Loyalists held a demonstration outside Stormont shortly before MLAs met. Four people held a Union flag and placards which read "Two-tiered policing must end now." Former Belfast councillor Gillian Bunting said she felt the voice of loyalism is not being heard. She said, "We must have our political representatives representing us. It seems the MLAs are going into the Assembly to condemn and talk about what's going on in the country at the minute, but none of them are trying to solve the problems that we have." Earlier, PSNI Assistant Chief Constable Jonathan Roberts said 55 police officers have been injured across several nights of disorder in Northern Ireland. Mr. Roberts said multiple petrol bombs and missiles, including fireworks and heavy masonry, were thrown, and it is clear there was a degree of organisation of the violence. He said, "We saw young people participating in serious disorder and committing serious criminal offences, and they were supported and encouraged, and the actions were orchestrated by adults at certain times." It's early to indicate whether or not any prescribed organisations were involved, but it is our assessment that is a likely situation. We have seen scenes last night of a new generation of young people who have been exposed to scenes that I'm sure we all thought were in generations gone by, and I would encourage anybody in a position of leadership, political representatives, community representatives, parents, take an interest in what young people are doing, and to have a united message to prevent further scenes like we witnessed last night. Mr. Roberts said 2 adults have been arrested following the incidents in Belfast, and further arrests will be made in the coming days and weeks. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney branded Wednesday night's events disturbing. He said, "Further very disturbing scenes this evening in Belfast. Attacks on police, journalists and citizens must be condemned by all." There are peaceful, democratic and legal channels to address all issues and concerns. Calm and positive leadership needed from all. Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland Louise Hay said the mindless violence is damaging local communities and serves no purpose. She added, "The frontline police officers and all those trying to restore calm deserve our support." All those with responsibility for Northern Ireland must be united in condemning the violence and coming together to bring it to an end. violence will do nothing to resolve the complex challenges facing Northern Ireland. That will only happen through engagement and constitutional politics. Riots and attacks on police have taken place repeatedly throughout the last week and resumed last night after a relative lull on Tuesday. Police were attacked during violence in a number of Loyalist areas on Monday. 9 officers were injured in Ballymena, taking to 41 the number injured in disorder across Northern Ireland since last Friday night. The most intense clashes on Monday were in Ballymena, when 9 riot police officers were injured after they intervened in an unlawful march of Loyalists through the town. During the unrest, debris, including a wheelie bin, was thrown onto the M2 motorway, forcing its closure. Disorder also flared in parts of Carrickfergus, Newtownarby, and Londonderry on Monday, with petrol bombs and other missiles thrown at officers. Children as young as 12 have been involved in some of the violence that has been witnessed in recent days. Cars, a JCB digger, a phone box and bins were set alight in the waterside area of Londonderry on Monday. Police said a brick was thrown at a taxi, which was carrying a passenger at the time, on the Limavady Road. The street disorder that has flared in various parts of Northern Ireland for more than a week can be attributed to a multitude of factors. At its heart is Loyalist anger at post-Brexit trading arrangements that have created economic barriers between the region and the rest of the UK. For Loyalism, Brexit's Northern Ireland Protocol has undermined their place in the Union. But it took an event unrelated to the Irish Sea border furore to set a match to resentment that has been simmering since the consequences of exiting the EU became a reality at the start of January. The announcement by prosecutors last week no action would be taken against 24 Sinn Féin politicians, including Deputy Ms O'Neill, for attending a huge Republican funeral during the pandemic sparked outrage among some Loyalists. In several Loyalist working-class areas, many still in the grip of the malign influence of paramilitary gangs, sporadic rioting has since fled. Belfast, Londonderry, Newtownarby, Carrickfergus, and Ballymena have all witnessed scenes of violence that many hoped had been consigned to the history books. There have also been bouts of disorder within Republican areas in recent days. The most stark, youths on both sides of a West Belfast peace line pelted petrol bombs and other missiles at each other through Wednesday night. For Loyalists, the funeral of former IRA leader Bobby Storey last June hardened a long-standing perception held by many within their community that the institutions of the state affords preferential treatment to Republicans. For apparent confirmation, they pointed to police engagement with the Sinn Féin funeral organisers prior to an event that saw around 2,000 people take to the streets of West Belfast when tight limits on public gatherings were in place. This interaction with the planners was one reason why senior prosecutors concluded any prosecution of Ms O'Neill and her colleagues was doomed to fail, the other being the incoherent nature of Stormont's COVID-19 regulations at the time. Criticism of the PSNI approach was not confined to hardline elements within Loyalism, and all the main Unionist parties subsequently called for Chief Constable Simon Byrne to resign, claiming he has lost the confidence of their community. Ms Foster has said she will no longer engage with Mr Byrne. Her lack of communication with the region's police chief during a time of escalating street violence, and coming only weeks after she met with representatives of Loyalist paramilitaries to discuss the Brexit fallout, has drawn sharp criticism from political rivals. Non-unionist parties have accused Mrs Foster and other unionist political leaders of stoking up tensions, not only in relation to the Storey funeral, but also in respect of the Irish Sea border. The DUP leader and other prominent voices within unionism and loyalism insist they are only reflecting genuinely held concerns they say must be addressed specifically by way of Mr Byrne's resignation and the binning of the protocol. Amid the current unionist clamour for Mr Byrne's head and claims of two-tier policing, it is worth noting that 2 months ago the PSNI chief constable was facing similar claims of discriminatory behaviour from within nationalism. Those were prompted by a controversial police operation in Belfast that saw a man badly injured in a Loyalist gun massacre during the Troubles arrested at the scene of a commemoration event after officers intervened to probe suspected COVID regulation breaches. Following that incident at the site of the 1992 Ormeau Road betting shop murders, Ms O'Neill claimed there was a crisis in confidence in the PSNI among nationalists, albeit she stopped short of calling for Mr Byrne to quit. The protocol and funeral controversy have not created the Loyalist perception that the system is weighed against them, but have built upon a narrative articulated by an increasing number within Loyalism that the peace process, particularly the Good Friday Accord of 1998, has handed them a raw deal. They cite underinvestment and deprivation in Loyalist working class areas as further proof that they have missed out on the gains of peace. Nationalists and Republicans reject this premise, insisting their communities have experienced just as many problems with poverty and unemployment since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Paramilitary elements are undoubtedly involved in much of the disorder witnessed across the region in recent days, either directly or by orchestrating young people to riot on their behalf. However, in Newtonabbey and Carrickfergus an added factor is at play. In those areas, the PSNI believes paramilitary involvement is less motivated by Brexit or the Storey funeral and more to do with a rogue faction the South East Antrim UDA reacting to recent police operations targeting its criminal empire.
Bye.